Hey everyone, my name is Michael and today I want to have a look at the DataLoader caching, how it works and how we can extend it, hook into it to have longer duration caches or whatnot. Before we get started, if you want to have the source code of this episode or any other episode that we have on YouTube, head over to tv.chillicream.com. If you like our content, please hit the like and subscribe button below the video. And with that, let's dive in. So this is my typical demo project around a web shop. It's part of the Microsoft eShop, just in a GraphQL version. And what we want to have a look at is the caching that the DataLoader has here. So how does this work? If we, for instance, have here the brand queries and we get a brand by ID, how long is this thing actually cached? So in this case, our brand resolver here uses a brand service, and this brand service uses here the brand by ID data loader. And when we implement a data loader, we actually just implement the fetch method for it. So this is a batch fetch method that we have here for the brand by ID data loader. We never get to see or never get to interact actually with the cache, everything that is generated by Hot Chocolate, and we don't know how this actually works, right? So we're going to have a look at that. So let's start actually the server. Our server is up. Let's go to Nitro, and there we write a simple query to get the brand by ID. And I'm just getting here the name, and I run that, and then I get here Daybird. And what we can see is that we have down here the SQL to fetch the data. And if we run that again, then you can see there's another SQL. So that means there's actually observable no caching. There is, and if we would run this request, the same request multiple times, like this would run the same fetch multiple times in the same request. Let me actually wipe that out here, and then we can rerun that. And then you can see we have a single SQL here. Then that is actually just resolving for the first field, the data, and then getting the second from the cache. So what if we have something like this brand here, which rarely changes, where we say, actually, we want to cache that for a longer time, but only brand, not product. Product is something that changes more frequently. There are price updates and whatnot, but the brands actually, they don't change very often. So how could we put a longer term cache in, like the memory cache from ASP.NET Core, to cache these things maybe for a day or two or whatnot? And turns out this is pretty simple. And let's actually go here to the program CS. The thing that we have in DataLoader is called a promise cache. And we can write a promise cache interceptor. So this is our custom promise cache interceptor, and it simply implements the iPromise cache interceptor here. So let's implement that. And then you can see we have two methods here that are called by actually our promise cache whenever there is an interceptor. So there's a get or add promise that is to either get the promise from a cache or create the new promise to get this particular piece of information. So what we have here is a promise cache key and a delegate that could create the promise, because we don't have any knowledge about how to create a thing. We just know how to cache it, right? So what we get here is the method to create this thing, the key, and then we can figure out if we want to put the cache in. We could simply just return this here. So say we're going to create the promise, and then this interceptor would fulfill its work in essence. And the second method, we can just remove this and return true. So we edit this. Has no significance, as we just get here the promise and we are supposed to cache it. We could also return false. It doesn't really matter. This interceptor can be registered with our DI. We can chain in here. We can simply add here a new service. This is a singleton. And then we just say this is a iPromise cache interceptor, and we are using this one here. And for now, let's just print something out so we see it's really hit. So what you can see is that the key here has a type. That is the kind of data loader we are interfering with. And we also have here the key, the actual key that we're using in that data loader. So we rerun here the query, then we go back to our console output. And you can see here's the printout, right? This is the data loader we have. And then we have here the key for our promise. So just a refresher, what is a promise really? So a promise is essentially a task. So a task is already kind of a promise. we have a custom object here that represents this promise, and we can cache that. So how do we get a long-term cache now for our brands in here? We don't want to use the type here just for a specific data loader. We actually want to cache all brands long-term. So first, let's bring in the Microsoft in-memory cache. So I say here add memory cache, and then we're going to inject here the iMemory cache. And we have here the T. That is the T of the thing that we want to cache. And in our case, it's the brand. So I could easily say if the T is type of brand, then we want to have it. Or we could reverse this and say if it's not, then we're going to just create this thing and we do not interfere with caching it. Same goes down here. If this is not brand, we just return false, and otherwise we're going to do something with it. If it's a brand, then we're going to cache it. And you can see we also have here a get or create method that we can use. So we pass in the key, and this is up to you. You could change the key to something different. You could make it a string or just reuse this object here. So this is a record, so you can use it as a cache key. Okay, then it's basically just passing in here the create promise with a key, which creates the cache entry or the cache entry value. There could be other things, like you could have options here, memory cache options that define how long this thing should live in this cache and whatnot. We are not interested into these details here, but this is where you could put more logic in. So, and then we just simply return this thing. And we do the same thing down here in triad. So in this case, I'm also using a get or create here because this cache doesn't have a triad. And then we're gonna just return here if we edit this thing. Okay, this is our interceptor. It will now intercept a cache operation, and then will let us either put it into our memory cache or do nothing and let the data loader promise cache handle whatever it wants to handle. So let's actually do that here, and we run our service, and then we're gonna run this here. So this actually goes now to the database and fetches these items, stores in the cache, and then we can run it a second time. Actually, let's clear this out. Run it a second time, and then you can see nothing happens, right? This just comes out of memory now, and this thing is now cached across requests. If I get now here the second item, you can see I run it. Gravitor, it's doing an SQL here, but then again, if we just run it, it's cached. Okay, so if we go for the product and run this, you can see this product doesn't exist, but you can see it's going for the products here. And even if I wipe that out, this here comes now from the cache, but this will always be fetched from the database. So not always, like we have this cache in the request. So if the same object is requested multiple times in the same request, we have the same object returned. But if there are multiple requests, for each request, we have a call to the database for products. So second request here, you can see second call. And this works with everything, like with projected data loader and whatnot. We will cache them as needed. So what if I only want to intercept my promise cache here when I'm in production, or when I have a certain authorization item or a certain header, right? You want it always basically coming from this long-term cache here, this brand. But in certain situations, you want to be able to just say, fetch from the database. So this is also quite easy to do. We can actually use a request interceptor or a request middleware. Let me show you that. So I could introduce here a public class that represents our custom HTTP request interceptor. And one tip, we have an interface, but we also have a base class. Use a base class because then you don't have to implement the whole thing. So now we can just override here the create request. So what is this thing? This thing sits in between the GraphQL execution engine and the HTTP transport layer. When the request comes in, this thing is used to create actually the GraphQL request. So we have here the HTTP context of the request. We have the current request executor to execute the request. And we have here a builder to build up the GraphQL request. And this builder already has things on it, like the GraphQL request that we inferred from the transport. but we can add additional things. For instance, in this case, we can have a look at the headers, and then we can look if there is a header for disable cache. In that case, we do not want to have a cache. So this cache is pre-configured. The way we can do that is to get the DataLoader options here. And the DataLoader options live in the DI. So we can just go here for the request services and say we want to have a required service, which is called DataLoader options. And on these options, we have the cache. This is the promise cache. And the promise cache actually has an interceptor. For this, we actually have to cast it to its implementation. And then we can say we want to have the interceptor here. Or we could actually make it nicer if we don't do a hard cast, but just do an is check. And we go here to the interceptor and we set the interceptor to null. That means don't use an interceptor for this request. Okay, let's put that together. We take this request interceptor here and we can say add HTTP request interceptor, use this interceptor here. And then we restart our server. Server's up again. We run this thing. You can see we have 2 SQLs. Then we rerun it again. We only have one single call to the database. These are the products. And now we're going to disable the cache with the header here. We want to disable the cache. We run that, and then you can see we again have 2 requests. So this is very flexible, how we can interact with the cache and intercept it and just put in a 2nd-level cache there that lives longer. So you have the tools to hook into these APIs. So what do you think about the promise cache interceptor? Is that something that is interesting for you? Were you already looking at how to solve like longer term caches? I think with DataLoader, you have now this clean API where you just care about the fetch. If we look at our DataLoader here, then there is no caching complexity, right? We just define, we want to fetch this thing. And then we have a second component down here that is just concerned with caching. And also on a very abstract level, we just provide here a 2nd-level cache, and then we're going to use this. So chime out in the comments what you think about this, and I see you next time.